Minsk urgently provokes Warsaw. The threat on the Polish-Belarusian border has reached its maximum. The Poles are sealing the border with concrete. Air blockade. Poland urgently closes its skies. A counterattack is being prepared. And then it gets tougher, as if Belarus is in a panic. Emergency step. After this, Lukashenko is finished. The old man has been driven into a death trap. Patience has run out. F-16 fighter jets in the sky. Poland's air defense is at full combat readiness. Europe is getting ready to strike at the old man. Lukashenko's regime is doomed to fall following Khamenei. Watch right now. My respects, this is Ukraine Today. I am Andrei Silakov. Let's discuss the total escalation on the Belarus-Poland border. The threat of a breakthrough. Minsk is preparing a large-scale provocation. Lukashenko's regime, in its death throes, has decided to go all in. Intelligence and analysts are sounding the alarm. There's a smell of gunpowder on the Belarus-Poland border. Minsk is openly preparing a large-scale provocation against a NATO country. Footage of the emergency redeployment of Western military equipment across Poland directly to the Belarusian border is already spreading widely online. Warsaw understands that a dictator cornered is capable of any reckless adventure just to prove himself to Putin. The Polish army is deploying into combat formations, preparing to meet the enemy fully armed. According
to the analytical resource Ukraine Context, these concerns are reinforced by the active movement of military equipment in the border areas and the introduction of new restrictions on flights along the Polish-Belarusian border.
Air blockade. Poland is completely closing its skies. And the first preemptive strike is being carried out by the Poles right now. In response to the threat of provocations, Poland is urgently closing part of its airspace in the east of the country. The strict ban will last at least until June. The operational command of the armed forces is closing the skies up to an altitude of 3 kilometers. All civilian drones, small aircraft, and commercial flights are now strictly prohibited in this zone. The only exceptions are for NATO military missions and rescue teams. The sky is locked down, and any violators coming from Belarus will be shot down without warning.
The Polish Air Navigation Services Agency, PANSA, has officially extended the ban on flights of small aircraft and drones within the 3-kilometer zone. This applies along the border with Belarus and Ukraine until June 9, 2026. They explain this as a national security measure and the need to protect airspace from unauthorized objects.
But that's not all. The Polish Ministry of Internal Affairs is making an urgent decision. The buffer zone on the border with Belarus is being extended for another 3 months. That's 78 kilometers of complete isolation. The border incidents are not stopping. Now, balloons carrying contraband are being launched en masse from Belarusian territory. But the real goal is something else. Under the guise of cheap tobacco, the enemy is simply probing the blind spots of NATO's air defense systems, forcing the alliance's radar stations to operate at full stretch.
The buffer zone allows us to counter attempts at illegal border crossings more effectively. We are pleased to note a decrease in migration pressure, but we do not yet consider this a stable trend. Therefore, we will continue to use all the means that have so far helped us stop illegal migration on this route.
The dictator's rat hole. The KGB is digging underground tunnels. And while the sky and the surface are closed, Lukashenko has decided to act underground. Polish border guards have uncovered a new shocking tactic from the Kremlin and Minsk. It turned out that the Belarusian special services are bringing in specialists from the Middle East to dig real underground tunnels for moving migrants into Europe. One of these hidden passages, 1.5 meters high and reinforced with concrete, was found near the village of Narevka. Nearly 200 illegal migrants tried to pass through this rat hole. Minsk's hybrid war is taking on the features of outright terrorism.
Physical and electronic security measures at the border, such as thermal imaging cameras and detection systems, allow us to respond immediately to any attempts to violate the state border, even underground ones.
And here, Poland finally snapped and made a powerful move. Warsaw is ready to mine the border in just 2 days. Prime Minister Donald Tusk made a tough statement. The country is officially withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention, which strictly prohibited the use of anti-personnel mines. The Poles are breaking the locks off Cold War-era arsenals. The large-scale Project Eastern Shield is no longer just fences with cameras. These are real deadly minefields that Poland is laying along the entire border with Belarus and the Russian exclave, Kaliningrad, within 48 hours in the event of the slightest enemy advance. We
are currently in the middle of successfully completing this extensive and complex mining project, which is crucial for our security, for the safety of our territory and borders.
The main goal of this mine belt is to permanently seal off the Suwałki corridor. This is a 100-kilometer strip of land, the only land bridge connecting the Baltic states with the rest of Europe. For years, NATO generals have suspected that Russia and Belarus would strike right here, cutting off Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. in a matter of hours. But now the rules of the game are changing dramatically. Warsaw and Vilnius are erasing borders and turning what once seemed like a vulnerable point on the continent into a giant, bristling military hub and training ground. A death trap for occupiers. In
general, Poland seeks to strengthen cooperation within the alliance, and to make sure that Russia understands the enormous costs it will incur if it attacks NATO's eastern border. For Lithuania, this new concept of territorial defense will strengthen the Baltic Defense Line, BDL. Similar to Poland's PS, the BDL is a strategy of the Baltic states to reinforce their borders with Belarus and Russia.
Patience has run out. Polish combat aircraft are in the sky. Due to these constant provocations from Belarus, both aerial and even underground, the operational command of the Polish armed forces scrambled combat aircraft to intercept. Ground-based air defense systems were immediately put on full combat readiness level 1. Any mistake by the dictators could now prove fatal and provoke a direct missile response from all of NATO. The Lukashenko regime is falling apart at the seams, and its collapse following the Iranian scenario, it's only a matter of the very near future.
And while Lukashenko is unsuccessfully trying to provoke Poland, the enraged Belarusian opposition is already preparing a real forceful scenario to overthrow his regime, from the inside directly. How Europe is issuing a tough ultimatum to the Kremlin and preparing to kick Putin's troops out of Transnistria and Georgia. All the details of the total upheaval, watch in the report.
While Russia is trying to hold the front in Ukraine, the very geography of the war is beginning to change. Kyiv is becoming increasingly active in places where, until recently, Moscow's influence was considered unshakable: Belarus, Transnistria, and Georgia.
Minimizing the influence of the Russian Federation beyond its borders is a security priority not only for Ukraine, but in fact for the entire civilized world and above all for the European continent. That is why the goals of Ukraine, Europe, and the West as a whole are absolutely aligned. They are the same.
Belarus is becoming increasingly drawn into the war. It is from its territory that Russia launches drones at Ukrainian cities. However, according to Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine has already destroyed the facilities that controlled these drones.
Modern relays for Shahed drones have appeared on the territory of Belarus. According to him, these are used for targeting and coordinating strikes on Ukraine.
But this will not be the end, as the dictators of these countries have signed a number of documents within the framework of the Union State. This is how Russia is slowly but surely devouring Belarus.
The current international situations are unfolding against the backdrop of heightened tensions, especially along the western borders. It is vitally necessary for us to develop allied relations and strategic partnership between Belarus and Russia.
At the same time, resistance to the Lukashenko regime continues within Belarus itself. Holding new elections, constitutional reform, supporting Ukraine, and pursuing a European path of development, these are all goals of the Belarusian opposition.
When analyzing the capabilities of the Belarusian opposition, just as when analyzing those of the Russian opposition, both the first and the second are puppet-like, artificial, as if they exist, but in the totalitarian regimes of Lukashenko and Putin, they are undoubtedly just imitating some kind of activity.
A month ago, for the first time since 2020, there was a bilateral meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and the opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. But what does this mean?
This is good. Again, according to the latest comments from Tsikhanouskaya herself, after this contact, communication with the president of Ukraine was established. There was some horizontal contact with the Ukrainian special services, who began to actively communicate with representatives of the Belarusian opposition on a regular working basis, rather than as a one-off occurrence. This is again in order to understand and gauge the mood within Belarus itself.
Another potential point of change remains Transnistria. Weakened by economic and energy crises, the region has, for the first time in years, found itself under increased attention from Kyiv and its European allies.
For example, with weapons, military personnel, gas, and also electricity, Russia cannot help with any of this. They simply can't right now. Undoubtedly, this is causing negative sentiments within Transnistria itself. Undoubtedly, many people are starting to become seriously disillusioned with Putin's policies and the Russian Federation. Now, there is even a widely held opinion in Transnistria that Putin has simply abandoned them.
At the same time, the European Union has issued an ultimatum to the Kremlin.
Russia has occupied many territories, and its troops are deployed in various regions, be it in Georgia or Moldova.
Therefore, yes, to achieve lasting peace, it must be clear that they need to withdraw their troops from all the occupied territories where they are currently present.
Of course, some say that these demands are unrealistic. But let's be honest, the demands from Russia are completely unrealistic.
European initiatives are increasingly calling for the withdrawal of Russian troops not only from Ukraine but also from Transnistria and even Georgia. In fact, a new security system is being discussed.
The configuration right now for such an eye-opening experience for the residents of Transnistria, for the reality, it is now as clear as possible.
But while Russia is isolated in Transnistria, in Georgia it still retains powerful direct military levers. In Abkhazia and South Ossetia, while at the same time keeping the rest of the country in a state of high economic dependence.
Russia's influence in Georgia is far less straightforward and definitive than it once was, especially back when such massive, wide-ranging strategic initiatives were not being actively implemented. Furthermore, we are seeing major new global economic and logistical projects being launched by major international powers and global economic stakeholders. Consequently, Georgia could now potentially become something like a strategically positioned neutral buffer zone, so to speak.
And of course, the people of Georgia themselves are not satisfied with this.
I'm here for a very simple reason, to protect my European future and democracy in my country. We participated in the elections and they were clearly rigged. And up to now, we've done everything in our power to show that we want a European future.
We absolutely do not want to be part of Russia. Instead, we want to be part of Europe, because we truly belong to Europe.
The war is not only continuing on the battlefield. Today, the confrontation between Russia and the West is becoming increasingly evident beyond Ukraine, in countries where the future security of the entire region is being decided.
Moldova makes a shocking statement and asks Ukraine to keep troops at the border. And yes, Kyiv is putting Putin's breeding ground under strict military targeting. How exactly will they burn out the Russian Kentora from Transnistria, and why is this enclave doomed following Minsk? You will find out everything in the story.
Russian troops in Transnistria pose a potential destabilizing threat to Ukraine, so Kyiv should keep its troops close to its borders. The former Minister of Defense of Moldova stated this. Vitaly Marinutsa.
For Ukraine, Russian troops in Transnistria are no longer an inert factor. They are seen as a potential platform for destabilization. Ukraine should keep its troops near Transnistria just in case. Even with limited capabilities, their significance remains political and strategic.
The so-called Transnistrian Moldovan Republic is an unrecognized quasi-state on the territory of Moldova. It covers the entire Moldovan part of the left bank of the Dniester and has a small enclave on the right bank. Despite its lack of recognition, this pseudo-republic is governed by its own authorities and relies on units of the so-called Russian peacekeepers. This is the only thing that still allows Transnistria to exist.
Like most other frozen conflicts in the post-Soviet space, Transnistria was created by the Russians with the aim of exerting constant pressure on both Moldova and Ukraine.
Transnistria, with its limited Russian contingent, has remained a territory outside Moldova's control for many years.
So, on the one hand, of course, it's a way to constantly put pressure on Moldova, but on the other hand, it's the presence of Russian troops literally in the very south of Ukraine, close to strategic Odessa.
Vitaly Kulik, head of the Laboratory for Countering Disinformation at KNEO, explains that hostile intelligence agencies operate on the territory of Transnistria. They organize terrorist attacks in Ukraine. In particular, they recruit citizens through social networks. Russian-occupied Transnistria has become a potential threat to Ukraine. Since
2014, Russia has used Transnistria as a staging ground for carrying out information sabotage and has even sent in sabotage groups. In 2014, they landed in Budjak, and in 2022, they attempted to deploy paratroopers in Odessa. During Euromaidan, representatives of pro-Russian political forces fled to Transnistria. According to
the expert, it is precisely in Transnistria that the most toxic pro-Russian Telegram channels are administered, which recruit Ukrainians to commit terrorist acts for money. They find young people and instruct them on how to make explosives. Such operations are overseen by GRU or FSB officers.
This is dangerous. There are about 1,500 Russian soldiers stationed there who can cause problems. There are also 8,000 servicemen in the so-called Transnistrian army and thousands more in the special services. This could be a potential threat. They have a multiple rocket launcher system, 6 tanks, armored personnel carriers, small arms, and they know how to manufacture them. In
December, the media reported that the risk of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups infiltrating Ukraine from the territory of Transnistria had increased. Supposedly, in this way, the Kremlin wanted to divert some of Ukraine's resources to counter threats from the territory of the so-called PMR. It was noted that on the territory of Moldova temporarily occupied by Russia, the so-called PMR, mobilization activities had been intensified. The military formations of the unrecognized republic are calling up reservists, and weapons are being taken out of storage at the depots. In addition, according to some reports, drone production has been set up in the PMR territory to serve the interests of the Russian occupiers, and drone operator training centers have been opened.
Therefore, of course, it is in Ukraine's interest. The elimination of this canonic entity, which has been maturing for a long time and which must be eliminated. That is why Ukraine fully supports the territorial integrity of Moldova.
The withdrawal of Russian troops from Transnistria is possible, but it will require some time.
Ukraine is interested in ultimately having all of this eliminated. Of course, Ukraine cannot do this on its own. Moldova must be the one to do it, by one means or another, but Ukraine can provide every possible support. In other words, Ukraine's ultimate strategic goal is the elimination of Transnistria as a phenomenon, so that there are neither Russian troops nor Russian influence nor pro-Russian forces there.
A complete resolution of the conflict is expected after the end of Russia's war against Ukraine. This was stated to Moldovan media by Moldova's ambassador to Ukraine, Victor Kirile.
This is achievable. We must remain optimistic. It is obvious that the final resolution of this conflict largely depends on how the catastrophic war unleashed by the Russian Federation against Ukraine ends. But at the same time, we have our own internal agenda.
In any case, there will be no war in Transnistria, and Ukraine will ensure that this entity, as a geopolitical entity, is eliminated.
The issue of withdrawing Russian troops from Transnistria remains key to the security of both Moldova and Ukraine. But this issue cannot be resolved quickly. It has a clear logic and real prerequisites for gradual progress. The process is real, although lengthy.
Naturally, questions arise as to how this can be done. For now, the main methods are economic pressure. But will it be possible to do this without any kind of military operation? And will Ukraine participate in this military operation? All of this remains an open question for now. At the moment, nothing of the sort is being planned, but never say never. In any case, Transnistria is indeed a very strategically dangerous region for Ukraine, so Ukraine will be interested at all times in eliminating it.
So who will be first, Lukashenko or Putin after all? After the brilliant elimination of Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei, the Kremlin master's paranoia hit a historic high, forcing him to urgently search for traitors among his closest elites. Which of Putin's generals is preparing to stage a palace coup and finally topple the regime? Watch the story.
Putin's weak spot has been found. I
don't even want to discuss such a possibility. I don't want to.
Well, they're already openly discussing it at the same time. Mr. Trump, Mr. Netanyahu.
I hear everything you are saying, but I do not even want to discuss it.
The lightning-fast overthrow of 2 Russian allies, Maduro and Gomunet, seriously frightened the Kremlin dictator.
Most of the people are already dead. We had a group in mind and they died. And now we have another group. Perhaps they're dead too, judging by the reports. So, I think a third wave is coming.
Paranoid, Putin realizes that the same fate awaits him next.
Putin sows destruction around himself, whether political or physical. That's the first thing. Second, well, it's like that game Battleship. Right. There's just one square left to cross out. In
Moscow, they're trying to figure out how to respond further to Trump's unpredictable behavior.
If real patriotic reforms don't start in Russia now, the situation will simply become unpredictable. One by one, our allies are being systematically destroyed. It's clear who's next, and it's clear what negotiations with such an enemy mean.
Since Donald Trump returned to the White House, the Kremlin has avoided openly criticizing the US or its president. But now everyone is afraid for their own skin.
Here, of course, one can express deep disappointment that, despite information about significant progress in these negotiations, the situation has still deteriorated into direct aggression.
Propagandists openly admit that the Russian Federation could be next after Iran. I
am assessing the prospects of what will happen. I understand very well what the next problem will be. Primarily for us, there is one question that worries me. When will they come after us? Or have they already started? Then we understand that when they talk about Iran, they are also talking about Russia. They will now treat us the same way, striking Russia even more harshly.
The murder has undoubtedly affected Putin's two deepest instincts: a deeply rooted paranoia about his own longevity and a drive for political survival defined by victory over Ukraine at any cost.
This time, Putin commented on the situation in the Middle East off camera.
Please accept my deepest condolences regarding the murder of the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic, Ali Khamenei, and members of his family. It was a blatant violation of all norms of human morality and international law. And
still notably, Putin did not name the countries behind the assassination.
Russians themselves perceive this as a situation where Putin has nothing to say, and this is often perceived as a clear sign of inherent weakness. Russia is next and Vladimir Putin is next. And when they say in
Russian circles, Khamenei's death prompted comparisons with the overthrow of another dictator, whom Putin also called a friend.
Beloved Mr. Gaddafi, esteemed Libyan colleagues, friends, allow me once again to warmly welcome you to Moscow.
Back then, he was not afraid to speak to journalists and did not hide his emotions. In 2011, Gaddafi's death truly enraged Putin.
They killed him and his corpse was shown on all the world's TV channels. It's impossible to watch without disgust.
And afterwards, he stated that he was against solving problems by military means, as was done in Libya.
The murder of a person is, in general, a terrible crime. Armed groups that try to resolve domestic political issues by force of arms.
3 years later, the Kremlin cannibal would go to war in Donbass and then seek to occupy all of Ukraine with bombings and killings.
Agreements on this matter are being forced through by means of the armed forces to achieve this goal, namely demilitarization. We will not allow armed forces in Ukraine that pose a threat from the perspective of the Russian Federation and its people. Yes.
Over the years, Putin became more and more isolated from those around him. During the coronavirus pandemic, he hid in a bunker, rarely appeared in public, and FSO officers had to quarantine. Now he has betrayed all his friends and comrades to whom he had promised help. And now the only thing left in the hands of the unhinged Putler is nuclear weapons.
the removal of Putin from power is a legally justifiable and highly promising endeavor. This is currently the most cost-effective and straightforward way to finally end the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Palace intrigues are intensifying. Venezuela and Iran have shown the extent to which traitors can infiltrate the inner circles of dictators. Putin is a coward and carries out purges. He is afraid, constantly whispering in their ears that they could end up like Iran and Venezuela.
My office was destroyed after an attack by the Israeli regime. I smell gas. I should leave this building.
If the head of the regime does not intend to arrange a transfer of power, then top officials and elite groups may start considering their own strategies for such a scenario.
Today someone said, well, the president wants to do this very quickly. He'll get tired of it, but I won't get tired of it.
A US and Israeli military operation against Iran will definitely hit Russia and Putin. This is just the beginning. Dictators leave office either for prison or the grave.
And what do you think about these events? Write your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to like and share this video. Stay with us because it only gets more interesting from here.